Poupelle of Chimney Town, however you want to say it, it's a transition for the studio from 2D to 3D. And I wouldn't say it's the most graceful either. Fosse has a ton of experience in the subject. This is still a project that hasn't quite cleared the landing, let's say. It can be very pretty on face value, and yes, the animation is not quite there yet, but it is adequate. It's not exactly what we'd call like Loop on the first levels. Yeah, I'd certainly say inconsistent is what I would call it. There's definitely great stuff in here, the opening sequence especially. Although like the character acting is probably on the lowest level, and it sort of gives an impression of like the Emperor's New Clothes in comparison to everything else, which is on such a high caliber. And one of the most obvious outlines probably is the dance sequence, which feels very like awkward in between. It's just not quite good enough to be as impressive as I think they feel it should be. Like if you're going to do a Halloween level dance sequence, you better be on the Jack Skellington levels is what I'm saying. It's definitely a bit too long for something that has very little relation to the plot itself. There's this article by Peter Chung where he talks about watching Space Cobra back in the 80s without any subtitles and just drinking in its visual language. Now, my Japanese is not very good, but I got the gist here. This is not being subtitled yet, or it's in the premise of getting a dub, I believe. But I got enough of the plot out there. I mean, it's a kid's story. It's not like it was anything wild. So I absorbed what I had to. And there's some fun stuff in here, and some that's not so fun. So we have this sort of, I believe it's a garbage robot protagonist, and he's probably one of the highlights because it's a jerky robotic character. It doesn't have to hit that level of like uncanniness that a human's performance needs to be. His movements do feel right, and they're very intricate, probably the most impressive of all the characters. And sometimes the scripting and the boarding does like to play with stuff. There's a 2D platforming section, which I thought was quite interesting and playful. And other sequences that push harder. I do like some of the impressive displays of character action during the mind cart sequence. It's probably in the mind cart sequence that I would say is the most impressive stuff, which is towards the beginning of the film. It's just two characters doing strange stuff in a weird cart, and the animation is just going insane. It's so fast and technicolor. It almost feels like a 3D amusement park ride, and I'm very much into the aesthetic, quite frankly. And for what I could tell, the story isn't exactly groundbreaking. I've seen a little bit from the interviews, and I think I got the general gist of it, something about prejudice and an unlikely friendship, coming of age, sort of becoming a hero storyline. Everything you expect for 80 minutes. In fact, I may have saved you a lot of time here. You get to see the wildest dreams come true. Ooh. Although, the director has had much experience with Fosse's CGI department, although this is their first time directing, and in ways you can kind of tell. And yeah, I would totally say that these models are a step up from 3D prior models we'd seen at the studio in the earlier days, definitely. Although it's still a little bit behind what I would expect for the industry now. It's kind of a unique situation because they were approached by a Japanese comedian author first, and they were very particular about the look. It had about 3 years of production, but only 1 year to do its animation, which may be why we get a kind of difficult situation here. Obviously, there had to be a lot of trial and error mixed with the pandemic coming through, so I can be empathetic towards how this turns out ultimately, especially when you know how much time it takes to render out a single shot, especially now all the backgrounds are basically 3D, and they look great to be fair, but they're all moving, and it's definitely going to increase everything tenfold. The director once said something that it's not an adaptation of the book. We designed the characters in the world and the film from scratch rather than creating them based on the book. So I guess it's a spiritual successor to the original source material. The biggest achievement tends to be those when the characters don't move. That's usually when the 3D models look the best, and it sort of achieves something close to the truly flat anime look. And there's definitely some flourish here, I've got to say that much. The art design of the whole city is really impressive, especially with its world building. And I expect nothing less than Fosse. They've been doing this for 2 decades now. So yeah, you better expect them to have very cool cities. You can even draw it back to their first features. And how there is definitely a bold variety of color play here in the city. It's rustic pop-up lights. And then it hits a new level of dynamic when nightfall hits and the neon glow. Yeah, they definitely play with the ability that the camera can move so freely now, and the boarding is reflective of that, even if it can be a little gimmicky at times. A majority of the work is CG, but there's still a lot of 2D shots as well for when it would be faster to do it that way. If it would be the intricate gestures of hands or really small specific emotions. I do believe there's some problems with the action though. I think they still need to work this one out, especially when it comes to the fights where they kind of add in a lot of jerky motion for fast stuff and cutting of frame interpolation that just doesn't quite feel right. It's more disorienting than it is intense, especially when you add in a first-person perspective on top. The film also plays off a kind of licensed montage track moments, which there are several within the movie. Kind of makes it feel like it's an excuse to make mini music videos. Though, yeah, I suppose this has kind of been a trend in kids' films, even in the West, for like a long time as well. Sometimes the film does variate its style a bit. You have a sort of cut out 2D flashback, which is definitely a sort of visual highlight, although the studio has done more interesting stuff in the past, quite frankly. Overall, there's definitely a lot of craft on display, but I'm not in love with the final product. I think maybe I would have got more out of it if I could like listen to it translated, but I don't know, I doubt it. The movie does lead to an interesting crossroads for the Studio 4C. It made about $21 million on its opening last year in Japan, and that's not even taken its gross since or its worldwide thing. So this is probably a success for the studio, maybe one of their bigger ones considering. But it does worry me about the future of their trajectory, especially when I compare this to the prior work. So, for example, the year before's Children of the Sea, which basically outmatches Chimney in every regard, and especially when it comes to its 3D implementation. The closest thing I can sort of look to as a comparison point might be something like Utopia, which was a short made as a training exercise a couple years prior. Nothing says a kids project like Nuclear Annihilation, but that's the most fun we can have here. In the same way, there's some good perspective and strong colours for a variety of moods for its setting. You know, this shot has some fun perspective, strong colours, and it's in a good setting overall. But it does have a sort of level of creativity that the studio is known for, and it shows that really 2D is king for 4C. The true dynamic of the studio has always been merging those two worlds together. We can also see the next film, as well as this one, are still on the festival circuit. The new movie comes from the prior Children of the Sea director. Even if it looks to be a smaller affair, it's been very well reviewed, and I imagine it will be a great little film, even if it's supposed to be a bit more of a family sort of affair, which makes me worried about the direction and philosophy of the Studio 4C. Perhaps their original intention is now dead. That isn't to say 4C hasn't done everything, but Tanaka always wanted the studio to be about showing the true potential of adult animation. Hello there, we have Kat over here. And you have just watched a 4Sember or a 4C month video. Now there's supposed to be a bunch of them. We're supposed to be releasing them every day after all. And at the end of the month we should have a full, expanded, revised version for everyone to see. If you want to keep checking them out, there should be a playlist probably on the screen, I'm guessing. And to thank everyone who has helped support me during this period of time, it's been a little bit hectic to try and get these videos out. I need to thank all my patrons who get exclusive content. I got a lot of stuff earlier, etc., etc. Jay, Steven's mum, Takayuki Suzuki, Alex Moriarty, Paul, Subsofa, I hope I'm saying that right, and Chunks. Among all these other people, I've had to expand. We're in the editing dock right now, but I've had to expand the screen because I knew there was more space I needed to get all the names on there, so I've changed the angle slightly. Yeah, thanks everyone for their support.